Hello everybody, welcome again to the Open Book Tour. Thank you all for coming out on this very rainy and blustery day. I think you will find, in fact I know you will find that it is so worth it. I am thrilled to have Lou Cabeen here. I am such a huge fan of her work and her work over the years in different forms. Lou has been an associate professor of art at the University of Washington, and she is initially she was a textile artist who did installations and works of amazing complexity and size. I know I didn't see it, but I read that one of her installations required fabric that would cover a football field. So we're talking
1 3/4, actually.
1 3/4. About a little over a dozen years ago, Lou discovered that she had rheumatoid arthritis. And it was not caused by, but definitely worsened by the kind of repetitive movements she had to do for her installations and the size and nature and weight of the tools she used. And amazingly, without hardly missing a step, she scaled down, changed her focus from working entirely in textiles to working with paper, made her tools lighter and accommodated her limited physical condition with just increased exploration of the interior life of her subjects, whether it be the emotional cartography of belief and thought, or well, I'll let her lead you on this tour of her work. I'm thrilled to introduce Lou Cabeen.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you. Hi. Well, thank you, Cynthia, very much for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. And thank you to BEMA, who has the foresight to support the book arts, especially here in the Northwest, with this wonderful gallery and this kind of series where we can actually touch the books, right? In addition to looking at them. As Cynthia said, it's really great to be reminded of my own journey, and it's relevant to the kinds of things I wanted to say to you, a few introductory remarks before we get to play with the books. I have always made artist books ever since I was kind of launched into my public life as an artist after graduate school in Chicago. I would make about an artist book a year. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of revisit this portion of my history. I would make about an artist book a year and I would make an artist book when I had an idea that needed to be experienced sequentially. So my work on the wall, my work in space, and I will have to say, if there's any sculptors here, I know I'm not a sculptor. I would do big flat things in space. Okay, that's different than most sculptors like to think about themselves. But all of my work was informed, I realize now, the benefit of age, was informed by what you could call a collage aesthetic. In other words, I believe with Jan van Eyck of the Northern Renaissance that A, the eye is all you have to fool, and B, that guiding the viewer is a dangerous path. So you want to offer the richest experience, the richest visual experience possible, and then trust the viewer to find their way. through that information. So think about Van Eyck not be the. So think about Bruegel's paintings. Bruegel's big encyclopedic paintings. Every children's game known to man at the time. But we can find our way through that surface. Okay, so that's a little bit of the basic philosophy that has actually held me steady through my course as an artist. But every so often, an idea would present itself and not go away, where I felt that I realized that my insights, whatever, I wanted to be able to offer the viewer a more, I hate the word controlled, but a sequential experience. And then I would turn to a book. So my earliest books, which several are at the University of Washington Special Collections, my earliest books are from that idea. Every so often something came that I realized that either a controlled sequence, right, of information, visual and tactile information, and or the other thing that books do that I knew then, books provide us, they provide time. They're a built-in time element to our ideas. So sometimes I would have one good insight, but if you just saw it on the wall, it'd be kind of like a stop sign. But the real richness of that idea, I trust, was in getting to turn a page and seeing it again, and seeing it again, and seeing it again. Okay, so those are my two early prompts to make books. I have gone through a major life change, as we all have, in many sorts, but my health crisis of about 12 years ago did cause a lot of self-examination, as Cynthia so clearly outlined. And I'll tell you the other thing that books allowed me to do. I finally found, and I looked, I couldn't weave. And that fabric that is 1 3/4 football fields long is hand woven. Okay, so I looked for materials and mediums that would allow me to make work that you could play with, that allowed me to build on that kind of collage aesthetic that has always fueled me as a viewer and a maker. And also that could engage my attention long enough, to really, really dig in. And so rather than a football field and 3/4, I've actually found it in books. And I wish I could give credit where credit is due. I can't remember the name of the gentleman who said this to me, but I was saying, oh my gosh, it's taken me as long to make this book that it took me to weave my way across almost 2 football fields. And he goes, well, major work has nothing to do with scale. Okay, so there we are. Anyway, so thank you. What I thought we can do together today is look at the 3, and there's a few other smaller works. We could look at the works that are here in BIMA and usually behind glass. And I could provide you some stories of origin and some context for the pieces. And if there's time, there's another aspect of my work that doesn't get seen very often, and those are my altered books, which are my sketchbooks, and I brought a few to share. But since you guys have made the push, I'm mostly interested in answering your questions, okay? So you've got a little bit of my philosophy, heads up. I do like to make art you can play with, and I do have, I started out in drawing and painting, but I threw my hat in the ring of fibers early on because fibers was a field that has a history of myriad ways of making something. And that as a discipline, fiber may not have the answers, but it knows how to ask the question of how do you match, it knows how to frame the question of how to match your materials and match your method to your idea. So that everything in the viewer's experience, especially the tactile, especially the haptic, everything in the viewer's experience is going to support the conceptual goals of your work. Okay? So like I said, we don't have any answers in fibers, but we really know how to ask that question. So that's my take on artist books. But mostly I like to make work we can play with, and we can play with this. So, and I'm much more comfortable answering questions than I am just, talking. So does anybody, so what we have here, the primary works that BIMA owns are my Apparitions Among Us, major work, my brand new series, the first in a new series based on the legends of St. Clare, and my Tendon, Befriend embroidered books. I'll talk about them all, but does anybody have a favorite? Where shall we start? Okay, all right. Okay, good. Thank you. Maybe we'll just, Amy, would that be okay? Could we just set these wherever you guys would like them so that we've got plenty of space here? Thank you. Okay, Tendon, Befriend. And I am a recovering academic. So I really did want to throw it out to you, but this is the earliest work that's in the collection. So thank you. The academic heart is so much more comfortable. Okay, no. This is the Tendon, Befriend book. It is, as you can see, the cover is composed of work gloves, front and back. And as we open it, we have silk organza pages that have been dyed and buried in my friend's pea patch, her community garden in Seattle, and then taken out, and of course the dirt falls away. And so this, and in the center of each page, can you all see? Feel free to stand up and...
Can you hold it up?
Hold it up? Sure. In the center of each page, I made my own soil with feather stitch. And on top of those areas of soil, I then imposed, in very orderly cross stitch, the names and the dates of origin of all of the pea patches in Seattle. And we go through.
So when did you make this?
We're going to find out when I get to the last page.
Was this commissioned
Sorry.
by the city or by the...
Thank you. Excellent question. And so, where am I? 2008. Okay. Thank you for the question. I'm terrible with numbers. So 2008 is when I made this and the story of origin. This piece came about, and I don't know how we usually work this, but if people want to turn the pages or it can be passed around. Last century, how does that feel for somebody with an art history minor? Oh, I can say that. Last century, my late last century works. Anyway, I was part of an ad hoc group of artists whose history of making involved political commentary. Although I never thought I was political, I just thought I was telling the truth. But anyway, and our little band of brothers and sisters got called together by our fearless leader, Deborah Lawrence, whom you may know, to participate in a show at the convention center. And so this is big time. This is a big space, very public space. And she and her co-curator, Alice Dubiel, asked all of us, there were maybe 8 or 9 of us, asked us all to read a scientific study that had, at that 2008, oh, I guess this wasn't late last century. Anyway, sorry. Okay. Anyway, this piece came about because of being asked to respond to a scientific paper. The scientific paper was written by neurobiologists in LA, and they had identified what they called the Tendon Befriend Cascade, which is, and please don't get me too far, because I forget about 2008 was actually this century, so don't quote me on the science. But essentially, these were the scientists who had first identified that there is an alternative physiological response to stress, an alternative to fight or flight. And they had identified that cascade of chemicals that is in all of us, but it is augmented by the presence of estrogen. And this alternative cascade, and my midwife friends say, oh yeah, we know all about that, and there has been additional research that's been made available to the lay public now. Anyway, this was named by these scientists the Tendon Befriend Cascade. And it is part of the reason why these scientists noticed that when things were stressful at the lab, all the men isolated themselves in their offices and all the women cleaned together, cleaned the lab. And apparently that is so well known that throughout the sciences that's like an inside joke of what happens. And so this group of neurobiologists decided that they would study this, like this can't be just a joke, right? And they discovered this particular cascade. So we all of the artists read this fascinating scientific study, and I loved it. I loved what I was learning. I love to do that kind of research. I do a lot of research and that feeds my artwork. I couldn't make art out of it at all. I loved the information. So my response, sorry, this is a long story. My response was to embody, was to look at where did I see this embodied. And I saw what the scientific paper was rightly, identifying in terms of chemical cascades and endocrine systems and hormonal responses. Where did I see that happening? And among other places, but the most prominent for me at my life right then was in the pea patches, the community gardens, where literally people, men and women, were tending and befriending each other, because nobody works alone in those gardens as I participated. So, sorry, does that answer your question? Thank you for the question. And at the time, well, she's still my dear friend. She's no longer affiliated with the pea patches because she moved out of the area, but she was kind of the compost queen of the pea patches, and so I had a source of information through her and of thinking about soil and thinking about what it takes for the group effort to make this. And so I made my own soil. And so here's another aspect of what I talked about, like why would I make a book with this idea? There's all kinds of ways to celebrate and explore that idea. And I realized that I could make my own soil. And a book, because I would turn the page, you could see the roots. And you could see the fact that soil is not really just the dead color on the top of the ground. It's a whole well, we all know. Yeah.
Lou, how long did it take you to embroider all of that? Or one page, or can you break any of that down?
That's a great question. It's a fair question. And I can't, the short answer is I can't really answer it in one way. On the other hand, I was pushing deadlines because I had tried to make a lot of artwork and it didn't work, right? So I'm pushing a deadline. So I'm a little more aware than usual. And I did have an assistant. I did have to bring in an assistant. So I built all the soil, and my assistant and I traded off on the cross stitch. And I'd say we got it done in 5 weeks. Yeah, it's pretty night and day.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like to work that way, but this piece lent itself to being able to do that. It had a kind of stitching that is not individually, do you know what I'm saying? And this was a former student, very well attuned to how I work, and her own work was similar. The hard part about getting this done, I thought gardeners, I had collection bins in all the pea patches around me. I'm in the northeast of Seattle, because I thought they'd be glad to donate their work gloves for this effort. No. They would not part with a, yeah, thank you. All right, yeah, no, So these are all I mean, I did not pretend to make these dirty, but they're my random work gloves, and my children's. My adult children had to send me their work glove. Anyway, to get this done. Thank you. Yeah, great. So, any other questions? Yeah, and please feel free to pass it. And like I said, it did end in 2008. That I know that there are more pea patches. The whole pea patch movement has evolved and changed around.
Are you a pea patcher?
No, oh no, there's no way. Physically, there's no way I can do that. No, I've just spent the summer getting my entire garden up at waist. I mean, my entire yard planted at waist height, so I can be in the dirt a little bit. Thank you for asking, though. Okay. Other questions about this piece? All right. Any other requests? Apparitions, St. Clare. St. Clare, all right. Okay, so St. Clare of Assisi. This is my newest piece that's here, and really the newest thing finished that's out and about. This is the first of a series of 4, and the series is based on the legends of St. Clare of Assisi, which can be found in a book called The Little Flowers of St. Francis, which is, of course, a collection of legends about him, but it includes legends about her and his other close compatriots. I should say right at the start, before I play with this particular piece, a little bit of the context and genesis of this work. When I needed to relocate from my beloved Chicago to, I needed health insurance, honestly. And I'm very grateful, obviously I've transplanted well, that I was offered a job here at the UW, or here in the Northwest at the UW. But I'm a Chicago girl, born and bred, and it was hard to leave. And I found in the legends of St. Clare, I drew so much strength from her legends. And I did a series of wall works at the time. These were mostly collage, stitched paper. I even sewed rocks on some of them. I did a series of pieces in which I felt that I took on the alter ego of St. Clare. And I used my reading and my understanding of her legends as a way to tell my story of transition, of leaving a place that everyone thought I was a fool to leave, of leaving a place of financial comfort and going off into the unknown, which is essentially what St. Clare did. And so now, at the other end of my career at the UW, I realize that now, thanks for the opportunity to say that out loud. I just now realized that. At the other end of my adventure in full-time teaching, I found myself returning to those legends of St. Clare. And this time, rather than sort of use her as a way to tell my own story or a way to understand my own story, I've been really passionate about taking her legends and her strength and offering them out in a larger context. So y'all can tell me. Well, maybe don't tell me quite yet because it's new. But we'll see whether or not I'm successful at that. But that's my intention, all right, with this work. Okay. So I have also in this work with St. Clare, I have used the liturgical textile tradition. I did happily teach textile history for many years, so don't get me started, okay? But liturgical textiles, this is a burse, this hard cover. The burse contains the corporeal. The corporeal is, in contemporary practice, a 20-inch square of fabric, traditionally fine linen. which is used to catch any crumbs that might fall from the host during the celebration of the Mass. Okay, so inside the burse we have a very untraditional corporeal. That one can unfold. This is the traditional way one unfolds, the priest unfolds the corporeal. My apologies to the videographer, there's no other way to do this. And here we have the book. And I'm not sure quite how to even talk about this. I mean, it's something to play with. So, yeah, so I will. There's no right side up if you're playing with it on the table, but for the videographer, for the video document, I will hold it up. So the text says, Saint Clare and her sisters learn to bless their own bread, and all who partake of it are happy. Okay, so that's the text. This is all hand embroidered that runs around the edge of this fabric. And the meaning, the experience of the piece is in my mind, is very much in this practice, this act of holding and unfolding, and the reveal, right? The reveal of the information. Yeah, Catherine.
Can you say something about the quote around the inside that you just read?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I wrote it. Mm-hmm. It is my. So the question was about the quote on the inside. This piece and all of the other three in the series, I've crafted a sentence.
Can you say it again?
Sure. Saint Clare and her sisters learn to bless their own bread, and all who partake of it are happy.
So is that your interpretation of something about St. Clair?
Yes.
And why are you saying it?
Okay, so I will answer the question, but so let me unpack a little bit more of the things which I trust when the piece is in one's own hand, they're clearer. So Catherine is exactly right on. In all four cases, in all the pieces, each one has a single sentence which I have crafted. And the origin of that sentence has a point of origin in a specific legend or a biographical piece of information about St. Clare of Assisi, and it was crafted to reflect my experience and my intention of the relevance right now. But that sentence made sense, okay. And so, for instance, what we have on the outside of the corporeal, right, are these squares that are composed of all of my hard copy recipes. Some of them are in my mother's handwriting, some of them are in my aunt's handwriting, some of them are in my good friend's handwriting, and I chopped them up and I machine stitched them together like a crazy quilt. Mm. All of this demand, all of these different demands to procure and feed and organize and task and this is not a judgment call at all, but this is how it feels to me. This is how it felt to me to run a household. Okay, I've always been a working artist. I have 2 children. This is the way it always felt to me in the household. And grateful as I was for every friend and every other woman who gave me a recipe, but this is how it felt.
Continually patching it together.
Yes, and never like kind of complete. Never.
Always kind of trying to fit something in.
Thank you. Place. So this is how I felt. This is what it. I don't know how to structure that sentence. All right. Yeah. Thank you. Somebody's getting it. All right. This is how that feeling looked to me. I mean, when I tried to get, and that's actually the other core of my work.
Well, I'm a word person, and so I'm finding an implied pun here about coverage.
Oh. Okay, yeah, great. I mean, and I hope.
Continually straining for coverage.
Would you open it and show the back to the video?
Oh, sure.
Recipes?
Yeah, so this is considered the back, and I've just gotten a prompt for the document here. Boy, I made this well. Okay. So what I think of as the back, or the outside of the corporeal, is this rigid surface. Now, on the fabric itself, you can see that there's additional text, right? There's additional text, and there I asked the women at my church who make the communion bread to handwrite out the recipe they use. And I made a silk screen, and I silk screened that recipe over and over on the fabric itself. All right? So I don't want to tell you guys how to experience this piece. All right, so I can stop talking, or I can keep talking. Keep talking. All right. Okay. All right. So, in my experience, that can be seen as a resolution. You've got all of this mundane cooking, all this mundane struggle, fragmented, yeah. And then maybe it can be resolved into a, into a gift, into the sort of a classically identified, gift. But in fact, it can still feel a little frantic like that. And so on the inside, we have St. Clare and her sisters bless their own bread. And they learn to bless their own bread.
A kind of self-sufficiency is achieved. Or self-completeness.
Mm-hmm. Which, that seems to me to be the heart of that, yeah.
It seems very feminist to me, and I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
Very
pretty profound.
empowered.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Very empowering.
Yes, thank you. Because empowerment is huge for me it was what fueled my teaching. The only reason I feel that I was an effective teacher at all, because if you teach at the university level, you get hired on your resume, not your teaching skill. And so that desire to empower is, thank you, because that's in there. No, go.
Do these represent bread?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Abstract, but I mean, if people recognize these circles as bread, but in any case, and so in any case, it's a simplified form. I'm hoping that when you encounter it one at a time or in small groups, does that make any sense? It's a little.
Yes.
There it is.
Is there a reason they were blessing their own bread?
Oh, so you want to know St. Clare's story? Oh, yeah, I love to tell the stories. Okay, so the legend is that St. Clare of Assisi. Now, this is not legend. She was consulted by popes, right? She and St. Francis they produce all kinds of reforms. So, she was consulted by popes, and the legend is that one of the popes comes to St. Clare, because of course she's also cloistered. She's not leaving. She doesn't go anywhere. So the Pope comes to her, and she knows he's coming. So these gals were also really good administrators, right? Or we would not know about them now, in my opinion. So she knows the Pope is coming, and she has all of her sisters bake bread, like for days. And they bake all this bread because she's going to have the Pope bless all of it. And then they can feed the village with this, bread blessed by the Pope. So the Pope comes, he has his audience, they talk. She asks him to bless the bread, and he says, I would not presume to bless this bread in your presence, Clare. You should bless it. Now, the other thing, so here's my feminist moment, Catherine, since you said the F word, I will just follow up. I will follow up.
That's usually the F word.
Right, so this is the part I love about working with some of these old texts, is that you can see the Victorian goal of trying to make her a good girl. Please, let's try to make her a good girl. So in the legend, the Pope says, "Oh no, you should." And Clare says, "Oh, I could not. I'm a mere woman. I certainly couldn't bless my own bread." And in the legend, the Pope says, "On your pledge of obedience, I tell you to bless your own bread." And it's even in more religious terms, on your obedience to the vicar of, I am the vicar of Christ, and on your obedience to Christ, I tell you to bless your own bread. It's phrased in that way.
Can't do this without an ally.
So, exactly, thank you. And so, Clare blesses her own bread, and crosses miraculously appear on all of the bread that she blesses. So that was the core story. That was my prompt to and I know whenever we hear artists talk about their work, it often looks like you knew it all along. But in fact, like, those are the prompts, and then I think, it takes a long time to come to fruition, but those are all the bits. Okay? Yeah,
Do
question?
you know the titles, topics of the next three, the rest of
Oh yeah, they're done. They're almost done. And thank you for asking, and I'll tell you those for a moment. So the title of this one is Blessing. Just shameless self-promotion. I'll be having a solo show here on Bainbridge in April at the Bainbridge Arts and Crafts Gallery, and the other three will be on display then. The titles, though, I don't like to be coy at all, but let me think. 2008, last century. Let me think. Hi, video. Blessing, picnic, defense, and offering. So, Little Flowers of St. Francis, you can see if you can find this. Anyway. Great, thank you for that question. Yes?
But what a lovely way to bridge that story and then the things that are happening and shifting in the present day Catholic Church with that sense of feminism and independence and empowerment.
And particularly women's agency. Mm-hmm. I do think that Clare's relevance now is an example of agency, which her agency parallels that of St. Francis, so it's not a gender exclusive one, but given the nature of being female in the 14th century, her stories are extremely rooted in the domestic, the private life and things like that. Yeah. Great. Any other questions about this piece? How are we on time? Okay. Good. Okay, thank you. Great. This brings us to the big guns, the apparitions among us. So this is the piece in which I was given that encouragement that major work has nothing to do with scale. And I have, before I open up the gatefold book, and we're going to have four accordions. There are 4 accordions in this book. But let me tell you the background, if that's okay, because I brought a visual aid. As you might imagine, with my stories about St. Clare, I have long been interested in the divine feminine. I'm a child of my age. And in pursuing that reading, I discovered, to my shock and amazement, and I should say right here, I'm a good Methodist girl. Okay, I went to Methodist. I'm a spiritual child of John Wesley and Charles Wesley. I think if you can't sing it, it is not in the Bible. No. But just so you know. However, I read with amazement and kind of giddiness about apparitions of the Virgin Mary that had happened in my lifetime. I was researching Guadalupe and other historic apparitions. And in these books of the historic apparitions, I was reading about things that happened in Rwanda in 1980 or in Wisconsin in 1949. And so quite a while ago, I started a series of drawings. And these drawings still exist. So I engaged with my wonderment about this fact that there were these cited apparitions or recorded apparitions of the Virgin Mary in the continental U.S. in my lifetime. I was actually born in 1950, but I couldn't not include the Wisconsin 1949 one because it was almost in my backyard. And so I did a series of drawings. These are individual drawings in which I used the USGS topo map. And all of this, usually the map is just by itself. I did this to make it easy to show to y'all. I would find the actual location of the apparition. And that is found in the center of the circle. And then using my little stencil letters, I created circles of text in gold pencil that are a Latin chant that in my mind was relevant to that apparition story. That's just purely in my mind. And obviously I have to use the USGS topo map that has the location on it. And so what ended up with, I have 25 drawings. And I didn't even know whether they were art when I was doing them. I just needed to do them. And so I had a solo show back in Chicago, and I did have the opportunity to show these drawings. And USGS maps are not small. They're all roughly this size. And so this was an entire room of the gallery to have all of them shown at once. And I really liked what was happening. I didn't make them as an installation, but they really functioned in a very interesting way in the aggregate. Okay. And I realized that what happened when all these 25 were in this space and you could stand in the middle was that the system, and this is another thing I love in my own art making, the system of choosing of USGS where they've drawn their quarter, the system caused this wonderful abstraction to happen of partial gold circles that were out of my hands in terms of where. Does that make any sense? Like I did everything I could for the individual, and then there's a system that is going to set up this more abstract experience. And I was very excited and inspired by that, and sad because the opportunity for any artist to be given that much space doesn't happen very often. It just doesn't happen very often. And so, like many artists before me who do large-scale work or installation-based work, I realized that an artist book was going to be a way that I could share that experience with more people. And so, the Apparitions Among Us book. I consider this one book. It's made up of 4 folios. I don't even know the language that's used. Pardon me?
Chapters.
4 chapters. This one is Guadalupe, great and small, as you can imagine. These 6. So each accordion has documents 6 apparitions. Okay? And so if you open the accordion this way, you get to see a smaller version of those golden circles on the USGS map. Of course, the lovely thing about apparitions is we can keep turning them. And on this side, you have my letterpress printed paragraph telling you the story of the apparition that is on the reverse of the page. And I have placed those paragraphs in the relative position of the center of the circle. Yeah. So that when the apparition is open, Catherine, would you mind if I hand this to? Can we work together? Could we spread it out?
Sure.
Thank you. Down at that end because we have more.
You want the map up?
Well, let's just put it vertically. Like vertically. Perfect. So somebody's going to get the map, and then here's the next chapter, which is titled Public Display. And do you mind, you guys, why don't we turn this one up with the, thank you, with the text towards y'all. Right. So we have, is this working for the video? No, it's not. Okay.
We'll do that later.
Okay. So we have Guadalupe Great and Small. We have Public Display. We have Rural Sightings. And can we pass these? I think everybody's washed their hands. So why don't we just start this one around this way? Oh, this is nice to do 4. Everybody can see things. And lastly, we have Receiving Instruction. Now, I'll just start that one that way. Grouping these apparitions, now it seems self-evident, but that was something I sort of struggled with. They didn't group geographically. They didn't group, Guadalupe was an obvious choice. But they did start to share, there were shared, these are not arbitrary. These are based on truly shared aspects. Guadalupe is Guadalupe. Rural sightings, I think that's probably pretty self-evident. A lot of these things happened out in the countryside. Public display is kind of a play on words. It refers to some large architectural scale apparitions that were recorded. And it also is a play on emotional. So I did include weeping icons because being from Chicago, I have witnessed most of these weeping icons are from the Greek Orthodox tradition, a couple of them in Chicago, and I have witnessed some of these weeping icons. And then receiving instructions was another interesting thing that as I read these stories and pondered them, I realized that not always, but often, the Virgin will tell the seer to do something. And so those are the ones contained in the receiving instructions. So that was how I made those decisions. My goal is that my prompt, as I said, was to be able to have, at least on a small scale, some of that feeling of the installation available for people. And at the same time, to share the stories. Because, of course, my drawings do not include the stories. And, in fact, the titles of the drawings are the names of the quarter or the quadrant of the map, rather than the name of the location. I kept it it's very, very part of a related but different aspect of my interest. And I'll say a word about that because I'm obviously very interested in empowerment. I'm also and an aspect of that empowerment is how do we take public knowledge and put our personal understanding in it, or accept public knowledge and not undo what we know individually to be true. And so the apparitions and the drawings, especially for me, are all about the ultimate public knowledge, which is the USGS map. That is, we accept it as scientific, as objective, and as encyclopedic. And yet it has left out this huge subjective experience that takes place right there on that charted terrain. Yeah.
Well, also, for me, the map and these grid lines and all of that is imaginary.
Oh.
They're not
Yeah.
lines on the earth.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Mm-hmm. Oh no, 100%. It's all, you know, all and back and forth, and we all can bring that in. But yeah, like all of that abstraction. In fact, a map is a highly abstract language.
Well, and it's a consensual belief about space.
Right. Thank you. It's a whole nother document of faith, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And what struck me with these stories of the apparition is that if I'm going to find out about this little Methodist girl online, if I'm going to find out about them, it is because lots of people make pilgrimages to these sites. That's how, I mean, that's what one finds out. Does that make any sense? So, so that was my other prompt to use the map, was that these terrains are being changed by busloads of people once a month or once a quarter, making pilgrimage, setting up their porta potties, setting up their souvenir stores. Does that make any sense? So it's really having an impact. Anyway.
Have you gone to any of the sites?
No, I haven't, and I didn't find myself because I was really interested in this kind of. Anyway, no, I did not. I did go long before I was considering making this piece. I did go with my Franciscan priest friend to one of the Greek Orthodox churches that's listed here with a weeping icon.
It's time for confessions. That you haven't been.
But see, it wasn't. See, yes, but, and I know that there are artists for whom that would be essential. And I did try to visit a lot of the pea patches, but that has never, for better or worse, that has never been where I feel my strong suit is. Does that?
Sure.
I feel that would take it into a form of performance, which isn't really necessary.
Thank you. I mean, and I love artists who do that, but for me, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't part of the deal. I find myself a little fascinated now. Like if I were to go back, when I go back to visit my son in Chicago, maybe we'll take a trip up there to Wisconsin. I don't know. Does that make any sense? It's like afterwards.
In all your research and especially in doing your Mandela type things, did you perceive a theme of all of these?
The
Any
apparitions?
thread that goes through them, or
A through line?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good question. Yes, actually, I mean, what I perceived, not a through line in the way that one might think in terms of theology or church history or tradition, But what I was struck by was the this kind of open-hearted receptivity on the part of the seer. This open-hearted receptivity that sometimes remained and sometimes got controlled or captured by followers. That is really something, and it's taken me a while for that to all settle out, but that's how I would answer that right now. And I have that's just what I observed. That some of these sites that have been going on for decades have security, their own security guards, and it's kind of like this, the core experience is like in there. I found it, but it's not. Does that make
Raises 5 more questions.
well, yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
an edition work or unique?
Pardon me?
Is it a unique book or is it an edition?
This is, thank you for an edition of 5. Mm-hmm. And this one, thank you for that prompt. This particular, the gatefold box was designed, and this particular one was made by Jules Fay, and the others were made by Carolina Veenstra, the gatefold boxes. And I credit where credit is due, which is on my colophon, of course. I'm very grateful to Jules Fay and her shop that was up in Cedro Woolley, because that's where I did the letterpress. That's where I did the printing. This is digitally printed. The maps are digitally printed by me. And the relief printing was done at Walla Walla as an artist project with Mayor Blocker, and then Jules. I used studio time up at Jules. So it takes a village. Yeah. Other questions?
I almost want to hear the chants.
Oh, yeah, I did sing. I have sung Gregorian chants, so I do have a compilation of them. And most of them have to do with light, because that was another common visual factor. There were common visuals, although the word description might be different based on the person, but the experience of light and things like that. There was something else about the Guadalupe. Those are actually the Spanish prayer on the back of the votive candles to Guadalupe.
But you focused on just the United States, or did you do some that were outside the U.S.?
I have covered in the drawing aspect of this subject. I have covered world maps with them. It gets a little unwieldy. Yeah. Okay. Time?
Real close.
Okay. I did bring these altered books.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. So please, and then I can just be quiet and take questions and let you all look at things. But I suddenly realized that this is an aspect of my work. It should surprise no one that text and collage things. But I in the past I like to use altered books as my sketchbook. So I just thought I'd bring some in because it's one of those dessert things to, since we're a small group. And so that is an actual sketchbook. And then I mentioned briefly when someone asked me about my quitting my day job, I did lead a study abroad trip to London 4 out of the last 5 years. And the students would have to make an altered book as their travel journal. And of course I did the assignment too. So this is one of my London travel journals. And why don't we stack this one at the other end? This is another one of the London travel journals. So
that through London with
Will
your luggage.
these books be in the BAC show?
I've never shown them before. I just put them in my backpack and brought them today. I don't know. Yeah. So, thank you for your attention. And in answer to your question, the trip to London was we went to London and we stayed there.
Oh.
We had rooms in the dorm right behind the Tate Modern. Why would you go anywhere else? And the kids had their studio space was the desk in their dorm room. Like I had no classroom, no studio space. So the students all got a kit because this was also an interdisciplinary class. So I had some art majors, but mostly not. Only about a third of the students were art majors. So we met in the spring quarter and altered the book. I showed them how to alter the book with gesso and paper. And then they all bought their little kit of supplies at Artisan Craftsmen, who were very professional and fabulous to work with my whole time teaching. And the art students were insulted, and the business majors were thrilled. The art students were way too polite to tell me they were insulted, but they really knew what an X-Acto knife was. Thank you very much, Professor Cabeen. But I wanted everybody to have. I wanted to know everybody had what they needed, right? And then they set up their little self-healing mat on their desk in their dorm room in London. and they were supposed to have brought their gessoed book, and then they had to make collages. I mean, we all made collages, recording each day. And I encouraged them to not buy materials, that they should use all the debris that you get when you're traveling as a tourist. So that was the assignment, but yeah.
So, I'm sorry,
No.
I'm confused about, so this is a book about tea,
Yeah,
and you've kept the original pages.
some of them. I kept some of the original pages, and I kept some of the original imagery,
Okay.
and I kept some of the original text. And I gessoed out and made myself space. So thank you, it's a great question. So the way I approach the altered book, or this practice of altered books, is I take a book on a subject of interest to me, and I make one go through where I see what I think is interest, what I like to keep in the book, and that can be an image, that can be long text, it can be just a short caption. And I prefer to use gesso, but it does take a lot of time, so I'll also glue paper, as a way to erase. And so that's the first stage. And then you have this record of a dialogue of yourself with something you're interested in. And you can just follow your gut. You just it's very intuitive. I like this, I don't like that. And you have to remove pages because otherwise the book looks, looks like an offering. Unintentionally, like that one kind of does. So that's the first pass. And then you go back and you use those blank pages as a space for your own reflections. In my sketchbook, which is right here, I'm sorry I don't know everybody's name, but in my sketchbook what I would find is that the imagery that I had left, because it is a subject that I'm interested in, the imagery that I had left would actually prompt me. I think I keep better sketchbook records when I do this, because it's like an ongoing dialogue rather than just the empty white room of my brain writing down notes. Okay. So thanks. We are at time, and I want to respect that. So please feel free to be at the direction of the guardians of the books here, Cynthia and Amy. But I'm happy to hang out and ask any other questions. And thank you very much for coming.
So it's okay to take pictures
You bet.
of your work. Okay.
Just keep rolling a little. Yeah.
You are a dancer.
Hmm?
You're a dancer.
Oh, my daughter's the dancer. Yeah. So. Okay. Good.
Can
Yeah.
you talk more about the tours, or do you do them just for students? Or
They were just students. The university, the UW has a very extensive study abroad. It's actually internationally known and copied. Their study abroad program, and it is possible to participate. I don't know what's happening, whether the London trip is still happening without. I mean, I'm sure it is, but it is possible to join as a non-matriculated student, and so you could just check with UW's International Study Abroad program. It's something like that. International Study and Exchange program. They're their own unit. So it would be worth checking out. And of course the Alumni Association does amazing things. But I personally am not leading anymore.
are you at all interested in doing that again in London or elsewhere?
I am probably edging my way towards that. I've only been out of harness for a year. But I thank you for that vote of confidence.
Having been a tour manager on similar tours for Smithsonian. So
Oh, okay.
I'm very interested.
Well, I would certainly not want to say no, although I'm still kind of. Does that make
Yes,
just out
absolutely.
from?
Do you have a website?
No, but thank you for asking. The website was one of the few things that fell through the cracks when I retired, so I do not have a website. But you can certainly reach me. My email is my university email, L Cabeen, based on my name, L Cabeen, one word, @uw.edu. Sure, of course.
It's very, very
Very
fine.
good.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.